On February 8th, 1993, my boyfriend of 7 years and I went out for a fancy dinner at a rotating restaurant in St. Paul, Minnesota, where we lived. We sat across the table from each other and gazed into each other's eyes, and somewhere along the evening he said hesitantly, "Well, I guess we should get married." Just the kind of proposal every girl dreams of, right? Guess we should get married. So we giggled nervously and held hands and kind of breathed in a more shallow way, and then slowly the giggling dissipated as we realized we were totally not going to get married. In fact, we weren't going to continue our relationship. And by the time the waitress came by again, we were kind of clutching hands and sobbing. So it was a very different scenario than when she had first come by, to ask for our orders. It's a very lucky thing that David framed his proposal so tentatively. We should probably get married, because it opened the door for truth to come in. And we knew like a bolt of lightning that it just wasn't meant to be, but we sure as heck did not know what was going to come next. What came next for me was devastation and rage and confusion, a battle within me that this man I'd been in love with since I was 19, this soulmate, who I nevertheless knew I would not be making my life with. And a battle with my life's own journey or destiny, with which I battled and fought just as hard as I fought with David. It was a time that I knew but could not accept that I was not in control of my life. I felt actually that some great power had thrown me or dragged me to the edge of a cliff and said, "Jump! Just do it! Just jump!" Well, I was not, nor have I ever been, a jumper. I am not a risk taker. And I was losing everything I wanted and had worked for and had planned for and envisioned, and so I was out of my mind with grief and fear and so much anger. Well, the next significant thing that happened was that I got a grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities to study Thoreau and Emerson and the 19th century New England Transcendentalists at Oregon State University in Corvallis, Oregon. And here's how that happened. High school English teachers were welcome to apply for these grants. And you could choose anything. There were like 50 or 60 all over the country, but they were highly competitive. And I really thought that Emerson and Thoreau would be the most boring possible subject to study, and therefore I might stand a chance of actually getting one of these grants. And that's how I chose that subject. But oddly, every time I thought and picked up my pen to apply for one of the other more interesting subjects, like folklore in New Orleans or Holocaust literature in Boston, I'd literally be overcome with nausea and have to lie down from the dizziness and the sickness. This is how God acts in some of our lives. Not fun. I just knew that I needed to get out of the house that summer, and I figured, because I didn't know what I was going to do after I actually moved out, and I figured, why not get paid to study even something so dull as that? So getting the grant, actually getting it, seemed like a punishment of sorts, and the most stultifying way to spend 3 weeks that I could imagine, like a professional banishment of a kind. But I was in my late 20s then, and I imagined very serious, very boring professor types droning on and on about Emerson, and I dreaded going, but I knew that I had to go, so I accepted the invitation and I climbed into my bright red, lipstick red Toyota Corolla, Dolly, I named her, I called her, in June that summer, and I started west, from St. Paul to the Pacific coast. We didn't have cell phones or GPSs back then, so it was just me and some cassette tapes and those AAA triptychs. that they used to give you. Remember, you'd flip through them? I had like 20 of those because I was going such a long distance. I had 1,870 miles to go, and I had never been any of the places I'd be driving through. I was in for a real trip. During my adventure, that almost 4,000 miles round trip, I collected as many great stories as you can imagine. I collected, just like you've collected great stories on all of your road trips. Road trips are amazing story generators, which is why so many of our favorite films and novels have road trips central to their plot. Think about, things like movies like Little Miss Sunshine, Thelma and Louise, Priscilla, Queen of the Desert, Two for the Road, one of my favorites, Y Tu Mamá También, Easy Rider, and all that literature, Jack Kerouac, Walt Whitman. Road trips are powerful story generators because they are our modern version of pilgrimage. Journeys that seekers once made on foot, not only to get from one physical location to another to visit a holy shrine, but to confront the reality of their own souls. Pilgrimages have never been just about the arriving, but the getting there. And so is a road trip, if you do it the right way. Though we start off alone or perhaps with a close friend, and we hope that close friend will still be a close friend at the end of the whole ordeal, we learn so much also from the fellow travelers we meet along the way, and we cannot help but be confronted with the truth about ourselves and our lives. The wheels turn, and it's just you and the road in that little metal capsule, just you and that lane line down the center. Driving many miles is a meditative state, even though you've got to be alert and attentive in that meditative state. I remember one time in Washington State on that road trip, I was driving along with my leg out the window. It had been so long, hours, since I'd seen anybody else on the road, and I saw some headlights coming toward me, and I realized, oh, I'm in the wrong lane. I'm actually driving in the wrong lane because it had switched so far back I never noticed. So you get into that meditative state, and only the most manic road DJ will be able to keep an external soundtrack or chatter going for the entire journey. Ultimately, the driver craves silence and nothing but the road and the landscape and the thinking. And it is in this condition that we are opened, I think, to God's word in our lives, or the utterances of the soul. Utterances that we don't always hear or want to hear back home in our regular routine. This utterance of truth is not always soothing or inspiring. In fact, as I learned, it can be disruptive and demanding. It certainly was for me, as the low murmurings of my life that I had pushed away started to come through more loudly and a bit more clearly. So I would say to you, please don't plan a big road trip if there is something in your life that you suspect you might be trying to repress. Because it's not the car breaking down I would caution you about. It's our unquestioned notions about ourselves that can become loosened far faster than any axle. So there I was on the road from Minnesota through North Dakota, Montana, then Idaho, Washington State, and then Oregon, driving away from misery and anger and confusion and heartache. And the many hours of solitude began to speak to me. It was during that drive that I began to hear from some source of wisdom that I actually wasn't being dragged to a cliff and told to jump off, but I was going to be asked to jump. Just like that trust exercise you do at camp when you fall back and you let somebody catch you. Maybe I was being asked to fall and be caught. What's interesting is that if I had had a phone with me, I probably would have been texting David the whole time. And I am grateful that I didn't have that phone, that I could let my life speak instead of my anxiety. One day I had been driving for hours with barely another car in sight, kind of on autopilot, taking in the buttes of North Dakota, when a herd of buffalo appeared at the side of the road. I had driven sort of through a crest, and a herd of buffalo just appeared at the side of the road, and I pulled over so fast that I actually drove off the road and into a field, and I slammed on the brakes, and I jumped out of the car and slammed my door, and I ran up to the buffalo. I had never seen any in my life. They were incredible. They were gigantic and craggy. They were like beautiful, gentle monsters walking around, just sort of chilled out, chewing grass, and I started bawling. I started sobbing. I couldn't help it. I cried and my nose ran, and I talked to them and I said really stupid things like, "You guys, I thought you were extinct. I didn't know you were here. I had no idea. You're so beautiful. I love you." I did, because the world is there, and it was me who had the tiny life. Not them. There was so much I realized that I didn't know was there. I was made to feel very stupid several times on that same trip. Another brilliant moment was when I discovered that in order to get from Minnesota to Oregon, I was going to have to drive through the Rocky Mountains. Oh, that's what those little caret symbols are on my triptych. It would have helped to really study a map, but I think that this is part of the gift of the road trip. It is like a prayer in that way. What I mean is that in prayer we come before the ultimate mystery with our questions, with our smallness, with our needs, our fears, our hope to be changed. We hope to be ministered to, or maybe calmed and heartened by putting ourselves before God or before the Spirit of peace and compassion. We move ourselves out of our daily schedule in order to have this encounter, and that's just what we do when we take a road trip. If you're going to Graceland, like that song, "Going to Graceland, Graceland," you can take a flight to Memphis, Tennessee, and get to Graceland. But if you're going to Graceland, in the full sense of the word, as Paul Simon's saying, you're going to see the roads and the rivers along the way as just as important as the destination. We put ourselves in the hands of the highways and the byways and all the spirits of a place when we travel by foot or by car. Even as we carefully prepare the vehicle and pack the snacks and charge our devices and install our GPSs, we do know that we are somewhat at the mercy of the trip itself, which has its own agenda. John Steinbeck, in his wonderful book Travels with Charlie, said that a trip, once planned, becomes its own entity with a personality and temperament, individuality, and uniqueness of its own, like a person. He wrote, "We do not take a trip takes us. In this, a journey is like marriage. The certain way to be wrong is to think you control it." My road trip had its own agenda. Before the automotive age, when we could all travel around in metal machines that could provide us with these private pilgrimage experiences, only gods and stars and atoms could move so quickly. And so it's no surprise that our cars have assumed such a central but yet unexamined role in our personal mythology. They bracket our lives' journeys in a significant way in this culture. A young person obtaining a driver's license is a rite of passage, as is an elder's relinquishing that driver's license when they know that it's time to get off the road in the driver's seat. But just watch a young man in the neighborhood soaping up his car on a Saturday afternoon, that old ritual, and you can see the adoration for the machine, which, let's be honest, has long been associated and conflated with masculinity in America. Most commercials for cars trade on this mythological association between personal freedom and the open road and identity, particularly manly identity. I always marvel at those commercials for all the vehicles that show the car alone on the winding vista. And you think the person who buys that car around here is probably going to be taking a traffic-filled commute in that car, where they're not going to be really driving any open vista, but oh, what a sexy vision that is. Even if they just go down Route 1A in that car, 93 track, bumper to bumper. In E.L. Doctorow's epic novel of America, Ragtime, the Model T Ford takes on this personal significance for Coalhouse Walker Jr., a ragtime pianist and a proud black man. For Coalhouse, the car represents the American dream, the chance any man can have to travel, to take his family where he wants, to be free. But he and his car and his beloved, Sarah, come up against a racist thug, Fire Chief Willie Conklin, who is offended and threatened by this black man's pride and autonomy and ability to buy his own vehicle. Violence ensues, and then terrible tragedy, with the destruction of the car and eventually both Sarah and Coalhouse's lives. An escalation that is all too familiar to us yet today, which starts for too many African Americans who are pulled over for what they wryly refer to as DWB, driving while black. The dangers of the open road should only ever be internal, where the traveler's risky encounter with the journey of the self and the inner voice of one's life carries them away from what is comfortable, away from what they are avoiding, and toward a deeper truth and even perhaps a new life. All road travelers should bless each other along the way, as I do you and you do me, celebrating what a profound privilege it is to be free, to choose a journey of many miles, rather than to be forced to make it by displacement, war, famine, or expulsion. Pilgrimage is our birthright, as Coalhouse and Sarah sing to their newborn son in the song Wheels of a Dream from the musical Ragtime, which was based on E.L. Doctorow's novel. He will ride on the wheels of a dream. As for my own ride out west, by the time I concluded my studies in Oregon, which were amazing and never boring for 1 minute, where my professor for that seminar quietly put in my ear one afternoon, I think you should go to Harvard Divinity School. I was listening not to the past, but to a future yet unknown and unimagined. I packed my belongings once back in Minnesota, and later that summer I headed east on another road trip, where I then took up seminary studies and started another journey, which led me here to this morning with you.